Hi, I'm Evelyn Mamangon, and I'm very excited to present to you our Do the Right Thing tip number 4. This is part of Do the Right Thing tips series where I feature common mistakes of my students and, of course, how to correct those errors. Let's have a review first. So, in tip number 3, the focus is on run on sentences. It was discussed that in correcting a run-on sentence, we need to, number 1, identify what type of clauses are combined. So is it an independent clause plus another independent clause, or a dependent clause plus an independent clause? Then you have to, depending on the structure, you need to punctuate properly. I showed you how to use comma or semicolon in the previous session. And then connect with conjunctions consciously, because we differentiated the use of coordinating and subordinating conjunctions and how they affect the punctuation marks to be used. So although I did not label the type of sentences last week, I introduced you to the first type, which is compound sentence, when we combined an independent clause plus another independent clause. So we used comma plus fanboys, or semicolon minus the fanboys. And then another type of sentence that we looked into last week is the complex sentence. We put comma if the sentence starts with a subordinate clause, but if the subordinate clause is at the end, there's no need to put a comma. So this sentence was written by one of my students in the reflection form that I asked them to accomplish. The question was, how are you going to explain coherence and cohesion to a grade 5 student? I just want to have a disclaimer here. If there are other issues that are not related to the topic at hand, I will not comment about them. In that way, the focus is on the specific tip at the moment, and I may feature that specific error in another tip. So in this example, we have a combination of two independent clauses. So the first independent clause is, I will say that coherence is like teamwork. And then the other independent clause is, it is the ability of a paragraph to tie up all of its elements, thoughts, and ideas as one. So what's wrong here? Remember last time I gave you meme, I showed you a meme. Comma is not enough. We need to use semicolon. So here in this preview, in the original sentence, there's only a comma that separates these two independent clauses. So that's comma is not enough. You need to put semicolon. Okay, that's one way. Another way is to use comma and coordinating conjunction, because again, comma is not enough, which is why we need to use the famous fanboys to correct the statement. So again, if you're going to use comma in connecting two independent clauses of equal values, we may use comma plus fanboys, or if you don't want to use fanboys, you just use a semicolon. Okay, so let's now move on to tip number 4. Still do not run on. So we have part 2, because you have not yet fully exhausted other types of conjunctions and other types of sentences. So we'll try to do that here. So let's have the previous statement, the one that we discussed in the review. There's still another way to write this, and that is to use a conjunctive adverb. Because here in this sentence, again, we have two independent clauses. So what are conjunctive adverbs? Conjunctive adverbs are conjunctions that connect two independent clauses, where the second independent clause modifies the first independent clause. In the example sentence, the second independent clause in blue, it is the ability of a paragraph to tie up all of its elements, thoughts, and ideas as one. We can look at it as a modifier to the first sentence. To the first independent clause, I will say that coherence is like a teamwork. In some way, it tells how coherence works like a teamwork. So if that is the case, if the second independent clause works as a modifier, or it tells more about the first independent clause, we can use a conjunctive adverb. We need a conjunctive adverb to strengthen the bond between these two independent clauses. You may be wondering when are we going to use a conjunctive adverb and when are we going to use a coordinating conjunction, since I use both in the same sentence. It's really up to the writer which one to use, since the writer is the one who can identify the relationship between these two independent clauses. So you can determine whether if the two independent clauses are of equal value, then you can use coordinating conjunction. But if you think that the last independent clause is more of an explanation to the first independent clause, in that way it's a modifier of the first independent clause, then you can use conjunctive adverb. Hope that's clear. So what are some examples of conjunctive adverbs? So if you want to add ideas together, you can use additionally, also, besides, furthermore, in addition, and moreover. But if you'll be giving sequential events, so first, next, finally are to be used. For contrasting ideas, we can use however, instead, nevertheless, rather, regardless, and still. And for cause and effect relationship, we can have accordingly, consequently, hence, then, therefore, and thus. It's important to note that there are other types of conjunctive adverbs that I did not mention here. So going back to our sentence, we see that the second independent clause modifies the first. I've mentioned that for so many times. So in this case, we need to put a conjunctive adverb to put these similar ideas together. So to correct the sentence, we need to put a semicolon in between these two independent clauses and then add a conjunctive adverb and then a comma in between. So again, in between these two independent clauses, we need to put semicolon first, the conjunctive adverb, moreover, and comma. So do not forget that. You have to squeeze the conjunctive adverb in between a semicolon and a comma. If you notice, so it becomes now, I will say that coherence is like a teamwork. Moreover, it is the ability of a paragraph to tie up all of its elements, thoughts, and ideas as one. So if you notice, the connection between the two ideas now are stronger than that of the original sentence. Because that is the role of a conjunctive adverb. They make the connection more obvious. That is conjunctive adverbs point to the readers the connection. Okay. So let us have another sentence from the reflection written by my students last week. So in this sentence, the sentence now is the handouts, so well organized and with examples given. It is easier to understand what coherence is. So in this sentence, we have two independent clauses plus one dependent clause. So two independent clauses in blue ink, and then the dependent clause in black. So this is an example of a compound complex sentence. So what's a compound complex sentence? It is a type of sentence that has two independent clauses and then one or more dependent clauses. So what's the problem here? Remember when we use the coordinating conjunction and in combining we use a coordinating conjunction and when we combine two independent clauses. But that is not the case here. If you look at the sentence, the handouts are well organized. That's one independent clause. And then and with examples given, the next is not an independent clause, but a dependent clause. So we cannot use the coordinating conjunction and here. And another one is that, remember, and is not enough. We need to put comma before fanboys. So what's wrong is the placement of the clauses. So the writer used coordinating conjunction to join two independent clauses, to join one independent clause and one dependent clause. So remember punctuation. Another error here is a misuse. I mean, there is no punctuation. There is no comma. So we need, I mean, the end of the coordinating conjunction is not enough. We need a comma. So again, either comma is not enough or the coordinating conjunction is not enough. Okay. So never, remember, it's never enough. You want me to sing? Never, never enough. So please don't let me sing. To remind you that a comma is never enough or a coordinating conjunction is not enough. You need to put them together. So we can correct this by in so many ways. So the first one is by changing the structure so that the independent clause are the two independent clauses are placed one after the other. Okay, so if you look at the example, the independent clauses in blue are put side by side. I mean, put one after the other. So in that way, the use of the coordinating conjunction and is correct. Plus, do not forget to insert a comma before and. Okay, and in the second, the combination now between the independent clause, the second one, it is easier to understand what coherence is, plus the dependent clause. We don't need to put a comma in between these two clauses because the independent clause started started this part of the sentence. Okay, hope that's clear. So let me read. The handouts are well organized, comma, and it is easier to understand what coherence is with the examples given. Okay, so let's have version number 2. So this is to place the dependent clause at the beginning. This one, the one in black, the dependent clause at the beginning, plus the independent clause, comma, and then the independent clause. Okay, so make sure that you put this one with examples given, comma, and then place it place after that the second independent clause. It is easier to understand what coherence is because, do not be mistaken, because they are together. It will be a different idea if we put with examples given and then the comma, the handouts are well organized. That's a different one. So you will be mixing the ideas. So since the start of the sentence is a dependent clause, we need to put a comma before the independent clause. This one I have mentioned in tip number 3. So since the next part of the sentence, we are combining two independent clauses here, the two blue clauses, we need to put a comma and the coordinating conjunction and. Okay? So we have version number 3. So here we combined this one is an application of the tip that we have last week, and that is to use a semicolon. So with examples given, comma, same structure in the version number 2, it is easier to understand what coherence is. And then instead of comma and the coordinating conjunction and, we just use semicolon. And that will do. Okay. Okay. And then another version is to use semicolon, the one that I have mentioned in this tip. Semicolon, conjunctive adverb, and then comma. So with the examples given, comma, it is easier to understand what coherence is, semicolon. In addition, comma, the handouts are well organized. So there are 4 ways to correct that sentence. So let's have a recap. So how to correct a compound complex sentence? We first have to identify the structure of a sentence and then restructure if we need to structure them. Remember, it's imperative to punctuate properly, add fanboys after a comma, and then you can use conjunctive adverbs in between a semicolon and a comma. Okay, so hope that made it clear and easy for you to correct the sentences in the exercises that I provided in our Google Classroom. This is Eve. Have a great day.